We come to it at last. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. A movie that has been part of my childhood since I was 8 years old. I was 8 years old when my father took me to go see this film when it first came out in theaters back in '99. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is an awesome action space fantasy film directed by the legendary George Lucas and written by him. Music composition by the legendary John Williams, starring Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Jake Lloyd, Natalie Portman, and Ahmed Best as Jar Jar Binks. Back when I was a kid, I remember my dad first taking me to see this, and I can't tell you how excited I was. I had to have everything Star Wars when I saw this, you know. The original trilogy was my dad's introduction to Star Wars, you know, and that was back in the 70s and 80s. And, of course, I was born in the early 90s, so the prequels was my Star Wars. And when I saw Episode 1, I begged my dad to get me anything and everything Star Wars. I had an awesome Darth Maul mask. I had a double-bladed Darth Maul lightsaber. Back when the toy lightsabers were actually cool, they actually made them to size. Like they were huge lightsabers. Like you didn't even need the replica lightsabers to have like actual size lightsabers like the toys back then. They were huge. I remember when Episode 2 came out, my Uncle Dan got me Anakin's lightsaber, and that thing was like, that was like full sword length, like my long swords back there, 36 inches for a 12-year-old to have. Or was I was either 12 or 13 when, no, 11. Yeah, 2002, I would have been 11. And I had that, and that thing was just full size. Nowadays, toy lightsabers are like tiny, and they're just, you know, I want a replica lightsaber, but back in the day, you could buy the actual toy lightsabers, and they were awesome. Those old Star Wars toys were the best, and I wish I would have kept them. But I have some of my old toys back there. I have my Star Wars Episode 1 Naboo Starfighter in the box. I have 2 Episode 3 action figures, Emperor Palpatine, one with the blue lightsaber and one with a red lightsaber. And, you know, as you could also see the original theatrical versions of the Star Wars trilogy, One Last Time collection right there in the center. And then I have my Star Wars Episode 1 visual dictionary back there. And then just above it, you probably can't see it, I have a Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope placards up there. And then I got my Star Wars shirt on. Look at that. Look at that. See, I'm all Star Wars'd up. I'm ready for this review. And boy, am I excited. Welcome to Shoney Judgment. This is my movie review of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Prepare to be judged.
Hey, your daddy, Captain.
Oh boy, the plot. A much debated aspect of this film. A lot of people think that the plot is convoluted, mispaced, and lacks focus. Rather, this is a movie of beginnings. And it was a very difficult movie to put together in many aspects. It has many plot points. It has a main plot point and a few side plot points. But overall, it's just trying to establish the beginning of the end, the beginning of the fall, I should say. And so in this one, the main point of this movie, per George Lucas, the reason it's called Phantom Menace, was it's trying to tell the story of how Palpatine became Chancellor, which was the first step in Palpatine's overarching plan to take over the Galactic Republic and forge the Galactic Empire, right? And destroy the Jedi. So this movie is all about his grand scheme of taking control of the Republic, manipulating it, and then transforming it into his vision. And to do this, he hires a organization called the Trade Federation with a massive droid army to launch an invasion on his home planet Naboo, controlled by Queen Amidala, to sign a treaty making the invasion of theirs legal. But in doing this, what it does is it causes empathy from the Senate and causes the Senate to not have confidence in the current Chancellor Valorum, creating a power vacuum within the Senate, allowing Chancellor Palpatine basically to take over because he's the best candidate compared to the other two. So that was the main plot of the story, which is why it was all about the Queen and Naboo, and then you had Palpatine, and then all once he takes over. That was the main through line of the story. And the story was told through the eyes of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And that's another thing that I was kind of surprised about is seems there's a confusion on who the main character is. It's obvious, it's Qui-Gon. There's a lot of other main characters, but it's Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon is the main character of the first one, and it makes complete sense. I'm going to tell you why. The reason he's the main character of this movie and not Anakin, despite the fact that the whole trilogy is about Anakin and his fall to the dark side, is you got to start somewhere. And since this is Anakin's beginning, and the movie doesn't even begin with him, we haven't even met him yet. Basically, this story is where he's found. And Qui-Gon is the one who finds him. Essentially, Qui-Gon is the man who puts Anakin on the path. He literally sets destiny in motion. He starts the whole Star Wars timeline. He is arguably probably one of the most, if not the most important character in Star Wars because of that. He is the guy who found out that Anakin was the chosen one, that he is important to destiny in this overarching story of Star Wars. He was a master of Midi-Chlorians, and he also didn't really believe in everything the Jedi Order stood for. At this point in time, the Jedi Order was in fear. They weren't the Jedi they once were, right? They're in fear, which is why they have all of these strict rules, and which makes them questionable whether they're good or bad anymore. Like, they're still good. They still fight for peace, but their experience of the years fighting the Sith has just caused so much fear and doubt that they have these strict rules. And one of them being is they can't take children after a certain age, because after a certain age, they're too old to begin the training with Master Yoda. And the whole point of Jedi training is you spend the first 8 years of your life going through training with Yoda before you're released to a Jedi Master to complete your training until you become a Jedi Knight. And Anakin was basically going to skip that, and that's why the Jedi didn't trust him. That's why the Jedi rejected him at first. And Qui-Gon said, I will train him. Like, Qui-Gon is so important in this story, and he is the main character. Anakin is the main character. They're all main characters. Think of it like this: Game of Thrones. Ned Stark. Ned Stark was the same as Qui-Gon for Game of Thrones, right? Overall, Game of Thrones, the main character was Tyrion and Jon Snow. But in season 1, it was Ned Stark. He was the main character because he's the one that sets it all in motion. He found out the truth. The war started because of him getting captured, because he found the truth. And when he got his head cut off, everything exploded, and that's what set everything in motion. Just like this movie. Qui-Gon finds Anakin. He vows to train Anakin, and then he goes on a mission to protect the Queen with Anakin under his protection. He faces off against Darth Maul with Obi-Wan, and then is slain by Darth Maul during the Duel of the Fates. Why do you think they call it the Duel of the Fates? Because had Qui-Gon survived the Duel of the Fates, Star Wars as we know it wouldn't have happened the way it did. If Qui-Gon survived and lived on to train Anakin, Anakin would have been cared for, looked after. Qui-Gon was his father figure he never had. And Obi-Wan was his big brother, and it would have been a complete family. And I'm pretty sure that with Qui-Gon's help, Anakin truly would have fulfilled his promise to his mom and saved her. When he did that, there would be no reason for him to turn to anger and hatred like he did. He would, and Qui-Gon, maybe the Jedi Order doesn't support love, but Qui-Gon supports love, and he would have been like, hey, if you love Padme, your secret's safe with me. He wouldn't have made him feel guilty to fall in love with Padme. And, you know, all this fear and doubt and pain that would turn Anakin to the dark side would never have happened. So you see how important it was for Qui-Gon to die in the Duel of the Fates. That's why it's called the Duel of the Fates. Qui-Gon was the man who set the path in motion, which is why he had to die. And when he died, it was Obi-Wan who took up the mantle. But the problem is Obi-Wan's like the big brother. There's like a, you know, Obi-Wan wants to train Anakin out of promise for his master, not really because he believes in him. Yet, at this point in time, he still has doubts, but he trusts in his master's plan and keeps his promise to train him. But he never fully gets rid of his doubt, and it causes a difficult relationship between him and Anakin. And so that's, you know, when you see Anakin and Obi-Wan in episode 2, I know I'm skipping forward a little bit, but the relationship is a little difficult. Like, they are close, but it's difficult. I can't imagine it would have been the same with Qui-Gon. So I just wanted everyone to know how important Qui-Gon was, and that he indeed was the main character. And that was kind of the whole point, is it, you know, telling the story of how Palpatine became Chancellor through the eyes of Qui-Gon with his Padawan Obi-Wan, and on the way of protecting the Queen from the Trade Federation, they stumble on Tatooine and stumble into this boy named Anakin who just happens to be the chosen one. And then you have this awesome pod race, and then the boy is freed. They pick him up along the way, and they continue the story to protect the Queen, and the Chancellor becomes Chancellor. Everything you see transpires. I don't really see the issue with the story. I think the story is very good. The politics and the plot are actually interesting. Like, we never really seen the political side of Star Wars, and I think that was important because even the original trilogy back in the day kind of alluded to the fact that it was indeed politics that led into the fall of the Republic in the past. You know, how else would a war like the Clone Wars start? How else do you think the Jedi fell? You know, I think it makes complete sense that at least one of these movies is more political. I understand it's not as exciting. You know, that's one thing about the original trilogy, is they were all exciting. And so when we came to see this movie, I guess seeing that political story wasn't so exciting, but I don't think it makes the movie boring. There's plenty of action going around, especially in the beginning. Like, they fly into the ship, you got explosions, droids getting killed. I love that scene with the droids showing the Jedi's skills.
I was looking for a kind of sword fighting that was reminiscent of what was in the movies that we'd already done, but a more energized version of it. Because we'd actually never seen real Jedis at work. We'd only seen, you know, old men and crippled half droid, half men, and young boys that had learned from these people. So to see a Jedi fighting in the prime of the Jedi, I wanted it to be a much more energetic and faster version of what we've been doing.
One thing that's really cool is George said himself that he wanted to show the Jedi at their prime, since this was before the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Galactic Empire, because in the original trilogy you just had, you know, a kid, Luke, who barely had any training. You had a crippled, you know, cyborg Darth Vader, old men like Obi-Wan and the Emperor, like, and Yoda. Not saying that none of those guys are great. They're all great characters, but we're in a time frame where the Jedi are at their prime. They are in power, basically. They're in full operation, which means these Jedi are like the full trained Jedi that you heard about in the original trilogy. And so George wanted to show them at their best, and so he hired Nick Gilliard to come up with a fighting style that is more fast-paced and intense, and I think Nick Gilliard did a very good job. more on the Midi-Chlorians. Midi-Chlorians has always been in George's mind since the original trilogy. Matter of fact, there was talks that he was going to put it in episode 5, but he left them out because he felt, from my understanding, he felt that they didn't have a place there yet. And so he felt that, now's the time where I can start unveiling some extra knowledge on the Force. And one thing about this is the Midi-Chlorians doesn't change anything about the Force. Everything you know about the Force, everything Yoda says is true about the Force. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the Force around you. That didn't change, right? Just because George put a little bit of scientific explanation of how this works does not change that one bit. Why do you think Yoda actually never says the word Midi-Chlorian? Why do you think he never says that? Because it doesn't matter. That's crude matter. Midi-Chlorians are crude matter. This is crude matter, right? Luminous beings are me. Who cares about your Midi-Chlorian count? You got it. Okay, you're Force sensitive. I see that. Who cares? Show me what you got. How in touch are you with the Force? Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the Force around you. Regardless of your Midi-Chlorians, you still have to feel the Force around you. The Force is still a mystical force. That never changed. All George did was put a little bit of a scientific reason of how we connect to the Force and why not everyone is a Jedi. And I think that was perfectly okay. And I honestly believe that he was leaning towards something bigger, possibly in his 7, 8, and 9 sequel trilogy we never got to see. So yeah, as I said, Midi-Chlorians doesn't change a thing. As Yoda said, Midi-Chlorians are just like any other biological substance on your body, your hands, your muscles. When he grabbed Luke's muscles and says, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. This doesn't matter. How much you can lift doesn't matter. It's how you feel the Force around you. He was not just talking about the muscles. He was also talking about your Midi-Chlorian count. Why do you think he never talked about it? Because he doesn't care. All he cared about was connection. That's why he meditated with the Force so much. He cared about connection. He always made sure his connection was as pure as he could get it. No matter his Midi-Chlorian count. That was never on his mind. And that's what he was teaching Luke. That is why George never put it in the Empire Strikes Back. It wasn't needed. It's obvious that George put the Midi-Chlorians in episode 1 as a sort of a side venture to say, hey, there's something else about the Force that may or may not be important in future films ahead.
The films are designed to be primarily like silent films, and the dialogue and the effects and everything are just part of the musical composition to tell the story visually rather than through a lot of heavy dialogue.
From George's own words, he always shot Star Wars as the old school silent films, where the main way to tell a story was visually through the camera. And the dialogue always took a second seat. He never wanted to make dialogue-heavy movies, and that has been established since episode 4. Dialogue was never the focus. Dialogue was not how the story was told. The story was told visually, and George Lucas said himself that he wanted the dialogue to be kind of like, he wanted the dialogue to be part of the background music. Essentially, it is the background music, along with the sound effects and John Williams' actual musical score, which is probably why the dialogue has always historically sounded clunky in all Star Wars films, particularly this one. I will say one thing that did annoy me about the dialogue in here is, I will say there was a lot about this movie that sounded a little bit more wooden compared to the original trilogy. I will say that. But I will also say that Star Wars Episode 1 was also a very different movie that George has made. Like, this is the first time, really, that I know of that anyone truly tried to make a film 50 to 60% CGI. Whether you like that or not, it's a feat on its own. That there was a complete different plans, set designs, production designs, like budget meetings, like just different things you had to plan for. This is a completely different movie that he's ever made, that anyone's ever made. And I know it sounds like I'm making an excuse, perhaps I am, but it's probably why The Phantom Menace did have a few flaws and did end up coming up short in the overall final product. It's still a really awesome movie, but there are flaws, and I will say it's not really because the movie is inherently bad. It probably feels flawed because of how different the movie is and how difficult it was to figure out how to make a movie like this. It was essentially the learning lesson film of the prequel trilogy, you could say. And being the learning lesson film of the prequel trilogy, I'd say they did pretty darn good. Another thing I want to say about the dialogue, on top of it just being kind of a backseat way of telling the story, where the main way of telling the story was through the visuals and the dialogue took a backseat. Another reason why the dialogue in Star Wars has always been clunky is because, well, Star Wars was designed to be a kid's movie, and you don't talk to kids and hope they can understand you by writing Quentin Tarantino style dialogue in the film. I guarantee you not many kids are going to know what the heck you're talking about. So yes, the dialogue is clunky and on the nose because the movie is talking to children so that children understand what's going on. So I think it is perfectly okay for the dialogue to be clunky. It's not bad dialogue, it's clunky and on the nose dialogue. Clunky and on the nose in a good way, because this movie was made for kids, which is why I love it, because I was a kid when I first saw this, and this just stuck with me ever since I was a kid. I'm like a big kid now, watching every time I watch this movie and the other 5 George Lucas movies, it brings me right back to when I was a kid. I feel like a kid every time I watch it, because they're made for kids.
Nothing can get through us to you. Bang!
Going back to Qui-Gon and setting Anakin on his path to destiny, that is the underlining theme of this movie, isn't it? This story is about the finding of Anakin Skywalker, and Qui-Gon was the one who found him, all while Palpatine is manipulating things in the background and wanting to be Chancellor to take control of everything. Like that is the story, the Phantom Menace. And the underlining theme that I feel is in this movie, you might feel differently, but I always felt was path of destiny. That's why Qui-Gon is the main character, because his role was to set Anakin on his path to destiny. And he planned to train him, but of course, that got in the way when he had to face off against Darth Maul in the Duel of the Fates, and he lost his life defending Anakin and his apprentice Obi-Wan, because he knew if he couldn't make it, Obi-Wan would, and Obi-Wan would take up his mantle as Anakin's trainer. And even though Obi-Wan wasn't as good as Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan would try his best, and he knew that. And that's all he could hope for. And I feel like Qui-Gon had a feeling that he wasn't going to make it past this journey. And he also knew that Anakin, after that, would have a very rough road. But he always believed Anakin would fulfill his destiny. And Anakin did eventually, didn't he? Yes, he eventually turned to the dark side, but he eventually did succeed. When his son was about to die in episode 6, Anakin killed Darth Vader. In his mind, Anakin killed Darth Vader and then killed the Emperor and fulfilled his destiny and protected his legacy, Luke Skywalker. And Leia. Leia was also in danger. Had the Emperor won, Leia was in danger. Both of the Skywalker children were in danger. Palpatine now knew who Leia was the other twin. So going back to this underlining theme, this was the beginning, truly the beginning, the setting of the path of destiny, and talking about how Palpatine was planning to take over the Republic and create into the Empire. I just think this movie is fantastic. Not perfect, but awesome. Standout cast. Liam Neeson, once again, as Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn was the best Jedi in this movie, and the best Jedi in the whole Jedi Order. He is the best Jedi. He's the only Jedi Knight, besides possibly Obi-Wan, that truly behaves like a true Jedi. You know, looking after people, knowing that it's okay to love and have affection for someone else. He wasn't really uptight and fearful of all the things that the Jedi Order were fearful. He was willing to take the necessary risks, unlike the Jedi. He believed in Anakin. And like I said, had Qui-Gon survived the Duel of the Fates, I think it would have been a different story. He would have believed in Anakin, and that would have echoed into Anakin's training, and Anakin would have believed in himself. And all he needed was his own self-belief, his own self-love, along with the supporting love and belief of his father, Qui-Gon. And then eventually, Qui-Gon most likely would have helped Anakin rescue his mom, furthering his self-esteem and self-power, knowing his mom's safe, knowing he's got a father backing him up. His relationship with Obi-Wan would have gotten better, and now he's got a big brother. And eventually he would have fallen in love with Padme, and now he's got a lover and eventually a family. Essentially, over time, Anakin would have everything he needed. He would have been a fully functional human being and the chosen one, a very powerful Jedi, a wise Jedi, and Palpatine wouldn't have been able to touch him. And with Qui-Gon's help, Anakin would have fulfilled his destiny side by side with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and defeated Palpatine and saved the galaxy from the eventual fall of the Republic and creation of the Galactic Empire. That would have never happened had Qui-Gon survived. But the fact that he didn't, that was quite literally the point. Qui-Gon couldn't survive. That's why he was the main character. He was the key to make everything right, which is why he died. And it explains why everything went wrong. Anakin Skywalker. Poor Jake Lloyd, man. I believe he was 7 when he was cast as Anakin, and I think like 8 or 9 years old when he was actually doing the movie. And what, from my understanding, watching the behind the scenes on my old school DVD I got from the 2000s, I got it for Christmas when I was a kid. And I still have that bonus disc. So I was watching it for this review. And from my understanding, Jake Lloyd, he would spend his whole summers doing this film with George. And then he would go right back to school. So imagine you as a 7, 8, or 9-year-old working constantly. You don't get a summer break. His summer break was shooting a movie. He possibly enjoyed it. But when you actually look at the behind the scenes, that was a lot of work for Jake. I was watching the part where they were casting other kids to play Anakin, and none of them had the energy Jake had. You know, I totally agree that this story of Vader should start when he was a little sweet kid. That's one thing that George said is he didn't want to write a story of how, you know, yeah, Vader was always bad. Like he was a bad kid from the start, you know. He purposely wrote young Anakin Skywalker to be this sweet, caring kid, an actual good person, an actual good kid, which creates a very heartbreaking narrative of how does someone like that, who's so sweet and good and kind, turn into Vader. And that was Lucas's intention with that. And I think he pulled it off very, very well. And Jake Lloyd did exactly what George told him to do. And Jake Lloyd did a very good job pulling it off. It's very believable. And I dig it. You know, everything and everyone has a beginning. And this is a trilogy of 3 movies. And since this is the beginning of the story of Darth Vader, it's very appropriate to start where he started. And he started as a 9-year-old boy in slavery with his mother. A kind, caring boy as a slave. Wow. Taking care of his mother. That is a heck of a burden for a young boy. You know, just like Jake Lloyd at his age actually acting in this movie, taking his summers to be in the movie, and then going right back to school. As a kid, he was working 24/7, but Jake Lloyd did it, and it reflected into his character in the movie. Jake Lloyd protected his mom, he took care of his mom, and when he finally was freed from slavery, vowed to come back to rescue his mom, and that was a very sad scene. But the actress who did Shmi, I can't remember her name, and her chemistry with Jake Lloyd was beautiful. It was so beautiful. They did so well with that scene. And when she said the words "don't come back," I teared up. You know, episode 1, that, you know, it has 2 points that push Anakin's turn to the dark side further. And it started already as a young boy with leaving his mom to slavery, and then later losing his father figure, Qui-Gon. It all makes sense. It was the first step of his fall to the dark side. Jake Lloyd did a great job. Jar Jar Binks. I think he was a very well made character. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. I thought he was actually kind of cool and funny and different. I mean, different is what we need, right? You don't want to do the same thing over and over again. Who wants to do that, really? You know? And that's what George was trying to do. He even admitted that he took things more simply and wasn't really willing to take risks, because at the time he thought he would get in too much trouble and things wouldn't work out.
I was very clever in the first Star Wars films in that I kept the design very simple, and I avoided situations where I was going to get into trouble design-wise. This one, I'm daring to take the chance and see what happens.
But when he got to episode 1, he decided, you know what? I'm actually going to push the envelope this time. I'm going to take chances. I'm going to take risks. I'm going to do things different. Jar Jar, you know, he wasn't the best character, obviously, but he was a great character. He did his job. He was like the funny character, and he had his own plot points. You know, he was an important part to episode 1, right? He led the Jedi to safety in the Gungan hideout, got him a ship to get to or a submarine to get to Naboo to rescue the Queen, and then he helped the Queen out to negotiate with the Gungans to form an army to face off against the Trade Federation and take back Theed, right? So Jar Jar had his own stuff to do, and he did it very well. Ahmed Best was a great choice for the character. George hired him because he's got a great walk. He's a very physical actor. He's good with his body. He can make all the goofy movements that Jar Jar does that George wanted. So, yeah, I thought he was cool. I thought he was pretty funny and goofy, especially as a kid. I still think he's funny. You know, I'm actually one of those kids that likes fart noises and stuff like that. So I was all down when the EOP farted in his face during the pod race. I always laughed at that ever since I was a kid. So, yeah, nothing about any of that bothered me at all. So, Jar Jar gets a thumbs up for being a good, new, funny character in addition to R2 and 3PO. He's a very loyal, funny, and goofy companion. This movie was obviously a very CGI-heavy movie, but not in a bad way. I think the CGI worked for this movie, and the way George Lucas used CGI in this movie, he used it in a very artistic style. When you watch other CGI-heavy movies, I feel like they come short in building a living, breathing world as opposed to George Lucas. One thing that George Lucas has historically done in all of his movies is attention to detail. He always made his movies feel like we were in a whole nother world. And just because most of this movie, like around 50 or 60% of this movie is CGI, just because of that, doesn't take away from the fact that George Lucas paid attention to all the details. Like, you go to the pod race circuit, you know, the whole stadium and everything. that is 80 to 90% CGI, but it feels real because he paid attention to every detail. Sure, the animation graphic quality is dated at this point. I get that, but it still looks good and believable. And if you just look at it as a piece of art and not look at it as this should be real, then you still get that feeling that I'm in an arena, I'm in a pod race. And yes, all the aliens look fakey. I'm fine with that because I'm trying to escape from reality in the first place, for one. And two, I think everything looks great, especially when they're fake. Seeing these fake characters interact with real characters brings a level of surrealism. Maybe that's not the right term, but it feels like the right term, so I'm going to use it. A level of surrealism where you got an obvious character who's not real, who looks fake, especially now that, you know, the quality of the graphics isn't as good. I think that makes it better to me. It forms a surreal feeling to me that I'm getting this interaction between this fake character and this real character. And this fake character is still relatable, you know, whether we're talking about Watto or Sebulba or Jar Jar, you know, all those creatures, the giant monsters under Naboo. I love those giant monsters. Like, it all feels real. They paid attention to every detail. This wasn't like one of those CGI movies where they only took 8 months to make it. No, this movie took 3 years. They took so much time and put so much effort into it. It's not that easy, actually. It's not that easy. You know, it truly was, episode 1 truly was a feat. Even Steven Spielberg, you know, like Steven Spielberg classically, he likes to use more practical effects, but he was on the set with George Lucas, and he even praised George Lucas, said, you know, this is going to be great. Episode 1 wasn't his favorite prequel movie that George did. I think he recently said that episode 2 was his favorite prequel movie because George did use more practical effects in that one. I will say episode 2 is a better film than episode 1, but I can't take away what George accomplished with episode 1. You know, using all that CGI. Like I said, episode 1 was when George was figuring out how he wants to make this whole trilogy. You know, he has an idea, and sure, maybe he stumbled on some of the ideas, but he tried it. He actually took the risks. He took the initiative. He just went all out with this. He said, I want to do this. You know, everything I was afraid of doing in the 80s, I want to do it now. And he did. And he pulled it off quite well. Obviously, there's some imperfections because this is a completely new type of style of movies to make. Like, he created a whole different concept and techniques of how to make movies using mostly CGI. You know, when you're creating the first movie of that, you know, this movie was sort of the blueprint for that kind of movie. But, you know, I don't really want to downgrade the Phantom Menace with that. It definitely stands on its own 2 feet. But I will say the level of imperfections that come from it, from both CGI to creative choices to how the actors perform to all of that, they went through hell in a handbasket making this movie. They had a storm come in when they were in Tunisia shooting the desert scenes in Mos Espa. They literally had a storm come in and just trash their whole set.
Yeah, this is heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
It stalled their set for a while, but it was amazing watching the behind the scenes and watching the whole crew come together as a team, rebuilding that set. And they got back to shooting soon after. They still got everything done on time and on schedule, and they left Tunisia exactly when they were supposed to be.
Hopefully we'll get this next sequence finished, and then we're only about 1 shot behind. And then we have to rearrange the schedule. But I think we'll go through this all right. Exact same thing happened in Star Wars. There's always something.
And the most miraculous thing of that whole thing was how calm George Lucas was. And I think that was important. Not only did George Lucas deal with that before already, when he did the first Star Wars in 1970s, but he had to be calm. You know, he was the leader of the whole thing. He was the boss of the whole thing. If he's freaking out, everyone's going to panic. So George couldn't freak out, and George kept his cool. He walked around. He was friendly with everyone. He's like, "Hey, how you doing? Good job." He's like, let's get this done," type of thing. And they got it done, and they went back to shooting. This movie had so many challenges. It's so easy to pick this movie apart and say, "Oh, it's CGI heavy, lazy, whatever." But this movie was not easy to put together. It really wasn't. There actually was a lot more practical effects. You know, they did build minor sets. They did use a lot of blue screen, but like I said, this wasn't like bad blue screen. I don't think seeing something as obviously animated is bad, as long as it's in-depth and artistic and looks amazing. Just because I know it's anime, I can quite literally see it's CGI, at least for me, that doesn't bother me. As long as it's artistic. And that's one thing I loved about the visual effects and the CGI of this movie, is it all felt like a giant painting, like beautifully drawn painting. Like I said, they paid attention to so much detail in the CGI, between the ships and the landscapes, the planets. Naboo was absolutely beautiful. Like the city of Theed, like the first time you saw Naboo and you came into that shot when it was like painting like this, and you saw the palace and the sunset with the waterfall, absolutely beautiful, you know? And that whole CGI scene was taken from a very beautiful drawing of that same scene. You know, absolutely gorgeous. And they paid attention to every detail. They got every building right, every window properly placed. The waterfalls were so beautifully done. The sound effects, you know, the lighting, everything. The landscape, it was just all beautiful. They paid attention to every detail. Just, you know, yes, the CGI is aged, but that doesn't matter. The CGI of the prequel trilogy, whether aged or not, is the best CGI I've seen in any movie, including possibly Avatar, which is saying a lot. I love the visual effects of Avatar. When I watch the prequels, I just think that the CGI is far more artistic. Like, looking at everything, just the detail that's paid attention to. Like, look at any animated CGI planet in the prequels and tell me what detail wasn't given to it between the lighting and the landscape. And if this landscape is densely populated, he pays attention to what each individual in this densely populated area is doing what. Like, he just makes it feel like a living, breathing world, despite the fact it's fake. And George always admitted it's fake. None of it's actually there. But that doesn't mean it's not art. Absolutely fascinating, and I think it was an incredible feat. Not just for this movie, but for episode 2 and 3 as well.
I know this is going to work. I know it's going to work because it's impossible. You know, we're pushing the envelope in a few places, but the biggest issue is volume. Yeah, I mean, just the amount of stuff.
Yes.
And, of course, that's the part that creates the world. Jar Jar is a key to all this. If we get Jar Jar working, because he's a funnier character than we've ever had in any of the movies before.
One more thing to say about the visual effects. That famous quote of George saying, Jar Jar is the key to all of this. People read into that a little bit too heavily. George was not saying that Jar Jar was a key element to the overarching story or anything. He quite literally was talking about that when he was doing the storyboard part of the film and getting all the plans out. He was doing like this color coding on the storyboards, and he's like drawing colors on elements of the storyboards of what would be CGI, what would be practical, and whatever. When he was all done, he said Jar Jar is the key to all of this, and what he was saying is Jar Jar quite literally was going to be the hardest thing to figure out in terms of making a fully formed CGI character, because he was one of the main characters. He's going to be in most of the movie, and he's mostly, if not all, CGI. They got to get his movements right, his character right. That's what he was talking about, because the heavy CGI that they were planning to do in this movie was really not done in any movie before. And so when he said Jar Jar's the key to all of this, he said, this is the first thing we got to figure out, because then after that, we could figure how we're going to do everything else in terms of the production of the film on the computer graphics imaging part of it. A scene that was quite difficult for George to make in the movie was the exposition scene at Anakin and Shami's house when they were all having dinner. What was pretty amazing is that was a 10-minute take when that they just played that whole thing out with no breaks. They did like 3 or 4 takes, I believe it was, and that had to have been exhausting. And by the sounds of it, it was. It was especially exhausting for Jake Lloyd, a 9-year-old kid. So again, that's excellent work for Jake. Jake did a very good job. George even said it was a very tricky scene to do because it originally was a 10-minute scene cut down to about 8 minutes, and getting all the angles right, making sure everyone got their dialogue right. They had to cut a few takes because Jake Lloyd mispronounced Coruscant to Coruscant. Just little things like that, but they eventually got it right. Very tricky scene to make, and I never, I always wonder, why do I love that scene so much? Because I do. That dinner scene was always amazing, especially the part where, Anakin's saying, I saw your laser sword, only Jedis carry that kind of weapon. When Anakin says, no one could kill a Jedi, and Qui-Gon said, I wish that were so. I remember as a kid, that kind of terrified me. Because when he said, I wish it were so, I remember, I'm like, what, Jedi could die? I never believed that Jedi could die. I knew that Obi-Wan and Yoda died, but the thing is, it's like, Obi-Wan let himself die for one. He didn't fight to the death, really. He just said, enough's enough. Held his lightsaber out, let Vader kill him. That's how I saw it. I don't know if anyone else saw it differently. With Yoda, he died of old age. So I'm not saying Obi-Wan gave up, but he gave his life. He didn't die straight up. Like, for me, I never saw a Jedi as being able to be beaten straight up. Luke wasn't a fully trained Jedi in episode 5. So yeah, he got beat straight up, but he was also a very arrogant kid still. And he had no business facing Vader. I mean, even Yoda warned him not to go. He didn't listen, and he got his hand chopped off for it. So that doesn't count. He had that coming to him, is basically what I'm saying. But when you got a fully trained Jedi like Qui-Gon, who's obviously good and amazing, I thought, this guy's invincible. He's not going to be defeated. And when Qui-Gon says those words, I wish it were so, I remember it terrifying me that, oh, what? He's afraid of dying? And then when you get to the end, he does get killed. That was shocking to me. I couldn't believe it, because I'm like, Jedi don't die. I looked over at my dad. I said, Dad, Jedi don't die. My dad didn't really say anything then and there, but when we were driving home after the movie and we talked about it, he said, anyone can die. And then I'd be like, well, you're not going to die. I need you, Dad. Stuff like that. But I was just a kid at that time, but I remember that kind of scaring me. I thought Jedi were always invincible, and that movie taught you that they weren't. There's a lot of good lessons in the Phantom Menace that aren't appreciated enough. So, yeah. That Podrace. That Podrace is probably the most fun I've had with this movie ever when I was a kid. The Podrace was so cool. The pods were cool. Everything going fast. The sound effects. Oh my gosh, the sound effects were so good. That was some of the best sound effects in the racing scene I've ever heard. And quite possibly still to this day. I'm watching behind the scenes. I learned that Tim Burt, for example, on Sebulba's pod, he took the sound of a boat engine And that's what became Sebulba's Podrace engine, was a boat with, heavily synthesized and a little bit more sub sounds thrown into it, but the primary overarching sound of it was a boat engine. And you can hear that. I went fishing all the time with my dad, and we always went on the boat, and it sounds just like a boat engine. It really does. I wondered why that sounded familiar. So cool. And there's so many other sounds and weird things they did to get these sounds. And Ben Burt, the sound designer or sound director, whatever his job is called, did so good. Oh, I want to talk about the costumes. Trisha, I think her name is. Don't know what her last name is, but she did amazing costume designing over 1,000 costumes. Have you noticed when you watch episode 1 that Queen Amidala, she has a different costume in almost every scene? Every scene. Well, why not? You got the money to develop that many costumes. You might as well make every scene unique. So I really appreciate the costume design, not just for the Queen, but for all the other characters. I love the look of the Jedi. I love the look of the Republic politicians and everything. And everything was just so well done, from the set design to the costumes to the stunts. Oh, the stunts. Nick Gillier, going back to that. Wow. And Ewan McGregor.
So this is a Ewan McGregor lightsaber. We have to go through one and fight. We're gonna have to get stronger ones made. They don't make lightsabers like they used to.
Wow, Ewan McGregor's dedication to be a great sword fighter for this movie. Ray Parker, he's like he was the one who portrayed the live action Darth Maul, an expert in sword fighting, in many ways of sword fighting, Kendo and probably HEMA. I didn't hear them say he was in HEMA. I'm learning HEMA by myself, but he was an expert in all sword fighting, martial arts, gymnastics, true stuntman, and it shows. Even George said that he was happy to hire Ray Parker because he truly was a professional, and he wanted a villain that looked professional and just wanted and expect. And he did expect, like, Ewan and Liam Neeson to catch up to Ray's skills, and eventually they did. They did really well. But Ewan McGregor, he went all out. He even broke a lot of his lightsabers during training, like bending them really, really badly. It was great. You could see that in the movie, and it made the movie so much better. I really appreciate it. Yeah, very well done. And going back to the Podrace, yeah, still probably the best scene in the whole movie. Second best scene, the lightsaber duel at the end.
Welcome to you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to this process of making Star Wars. Our director is back in the booth here somewhere, is George Lucas. And I'll thank you for him also. Glad you're here. We're going to begin today's work with the woodwind setting at 33.
John Williams score. Steven Spielberg said it himself, the Grand Maestro. He truly is. He really is the top dog. He is truly a god at what he does. He is the god of film composition. And his composition of the music in episode 1, most particularly Duel of the Fates, of course, he's a genius. How does someone come up with that? When you ask yourself, how did he come up with that? That's something you don't ignore. He's a genius. He's done that time and time again, creating legendary themes that we know and love from movies we love in the past. From Jaws to the old Superman movies, to Indiana Jones, E.T., Harry Potter, and Star Wars, and beyond. He is the author of so many beautiful and great themes of our favorite movies. You couldn't choose better than John Williams for a Star Wars movie.
Cut. I have bad droid karma. On Jedi, the droids just were perfect.
There's one last thing I want to talk about the directing part of the movie, the behind the scenes. R2-D2. Poor old R2-D2. And poor crew. Like, R2-D2 ended up being a pain in the butt making this movie. Because obviously R2 wasn't CGI in this movie for most of it. He was an actual robot, remote control robot that they developed. They had a Kenny Baker one where Kenny Baker was in it, but most of them were remote control. They initially designed a whole bunch of different R2s that can go in light sand, deep sand, go over thresholds and whatnot. And none of them were working. So eventually, I think it was their visual effects department in England developed an actual R2 that was where it could do pretty much anything. It can go in light and dark sand. It can go through the forest. It can go across thresholds. But it still wasn't perfect even then, because in the end of the day, it's remote controlled and things could go wrong. But I do appreciate that they put the effort in at least making R2, an actual robot. Gave it a little bit more groundedness, especially in a movie like this where everything else pretty much is CGI. So, yeah. And then that's one thing I want to end off with this topic is, in the end of the day, this movie did feel like a balanced product between practical effects, like the authentic real stuff that was in it versus the CGI fake stuff that was in it. I really like this film. It truly feels like a work of art. And as George Lucas said, every Star Wars movie, the goal was to capture a silent film of sorts by telling the story visually, where the dialogue and the sound effects and John Williams' musical composition was the background music you would always hear in the old silent movies. And I think George Lucas pulled it off again, just like he did in the first three. So, yeah, awesome film. As I sum up my thoughts on the movie, as I said, this movie isn't perfect, and I've talked so much already about how much I praise it, but this movie, when I rate it against the other 5 of George Lucas's Star Wars movies, this one is the lowest ranked on the list. Not because it's bad though. It's just awesome. But it's not perfect. And when I watched this, I wanted to give it higher than what I rate this, but I rate this film an 8 out of 10. This is the weakest one, and not because it's weak, but it's testament to how amazing all the others are after this film. And this movie, it wasn't the first ever made, but since it is the first chapter chronologically, it feels like a first chapter because it feels like everything is beginning, not just with the story, but with George finally learning to realize his vision that he always wanted to realize with Star Wars. And like I said, the final product we got was, everything needed to be there. Everything was perfect the way it was, but at the same time, it definitely feels like a blueprint film at the end of the day. All the creative decisions needed to be there. Everything needed to be there. But I feel like it was mainly the mixture of all those elements and the execution of all the elements. It was part of the reason why I probably give this an 8. We all grow up, and even though we still have our inner child in us, we're not kids anymore. At least I'm not. And when I watch this movie, it definitely feels more of a kid's show than any of the others. They're all kids' movies, but this one feels the most kiddie, and you could really see it. But it makes sense because it's the first chapter of Anakin when he was a kid, so the movie surrounding him really complemented that. And so it needed to be that. I don't want to take it away. I'm just saying, for me personally, this is just how I feel around it. I'm not saying it's bad at all, because it's not. It's just my personal feelings here on this movie here and now. It just feels like an 8 out of 10. And again, with the wooden acting that I noticed, and which is a byproduct of the fact that this is very much the blueprint of what would eventually become the overarching prequel trilogy. You could do a lot better, but you could do a hell of a lot worse. And in the end of the day, George made a fantastic movie. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell me what you thought of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Tell me how you rank all the Star Wars movies, and what is your favorite Star Wars movie. I will see you next time, and again, thank you so much for watching, and be ready to be judged.